In the previous episode, we saw how the German 47th Panzer Corps, tasked with capturing Bastogne early on in the Battle of the Bulge, was forced to encircle the town in response to the staunch American defense. By the evening of 20 December 1944, the first action at Marvi was over, in which the 2nd Battalion 327th Glider Infantry Regiment successfully defended the southern sector of the Bastogne defences against the initial attacks of the Panzer Lehr Division. The Germans lost several panzers and Kampfgruppe 901 was forced to abandon its preliminary thrust towards Bastogne. However, the village of Marvi would be subjected to a second, much larger assault of the Panzer Lehr in an attempt to capture Bastogne from the south. A period of relative quietness followed after the initial attack on Marvi on the 20th. The snow had arrived, covering the entire battlefield in a thick white blanket. Bastogne was raided by the Screaming Eagles, who were looking for white bedsheets, which offered better camouflage than the olive-drab tunics they were wearing. The tanks of Team O'Hara had in the meantime been attached to the 101st Airborne Division, further bolstering the defences at Marvi with armour. Nevertheless, Team O'Hara would still be covering their section of the line. Only a number of their tanks were spread across the battalion line to generate better defences. Colonel Hartford Saley's 1st Battalion 327th Glider Infantry Regiment, which had temporarily been attached to the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment, reverted back to the 327th Regimental Control and was shifted to cover the wooded area southwest of Bastogne. Elements of the 326th Engineers were put along the highway south of Bastogne in between the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 327th Gliders. The lull in the battle around Marvi soon introduced a period of increased patrol activity. This included the mythical 11-man Phantom Patrol. In the early hours of 22 December, one of the 54th Armoured Infantry Battalion's patrols spotted an 11-man patrol entering their own lines. Severely outnumbered, the GIs refrained from opening fire. The 11 men meanwhile confidently entered the American lines, seemingly being very familiar with the ground. They appeared to be without weapons, and they were also not stealthy. The 11-man patrol moved to within 100 meters of the 327th Glider Infantry's command post, and also walked right by the CP of the 54th Armoured Infantry Battalion. 4 further sentries later confirmed they had also seen an 11-man patrol move about the lines, and that they did not challenge it owing to the confident nature of the 11 men. It was never confirmed whether these 11 were Americans or Germans. HQ was unsettled with an 11-man patrol moving about unhindered and inquired neighbouring units whether they had also sent out a patrol that night. All came back in the negative. Just before noon on 22 December, 4 Germans appeared in front of F Company's position at the highway south of Bastogne with a white flag. They were subsequently blindfolded and taken to General McAuliffe. The Germans had come with an offer for the Americans to surrender. McAuliffe's reply went into history using the now well-known nuts. The Screaming Eagles would have none of it and would continue defending Bastogne. That evening, 2 German attacks on F Company along the same highway would be repulsed by small arms fire. By 23 December 1944, the line held by the 2nd Battalion 327th Glider Infantry Regiment was as follows. Company F held the right flank with 2 platoons and a squad in the line. A platoon of G Company held Hill 500 just south of Marvi, in the apex of the battalion's line. A platoon of either E or G Company held the left flank of the battalion, immediately east of Marvi and in touch with Team O'Hara on the left. The day was spent much like the previous 2 days, battling the extreme cold and keeping eyes peeled towards the front for German patrols. However, the lull in the battle at Marvi ended in the late afternoon that 23rd of December. At 5:25 p.m., German armour, likely the Stugs of the Sturmgeschutzbrigade 243 attached to the Panzer Lehr's Kampfgruppe 901, began to shell Marvi from a small coppice north of Martermont. 10 minutes later, panzers and panzer grenadiers advanced from the same area towards the platoon of G Company at Hill 500. As snow trickled down and the dusk set in over the battlefield, the white-clad German infantry slowly attacked towards Marvi. The fighting soon spread towards the line held by the 54th Armoured Infantry Battalion, which prevented the Germans from enfilading Marvi from the east. Within the hour, Kampfgruppe 901's attack on Marvi was in full swing. The Panzer Grenadiers of Panzergrenadier Lehr Regiment 901, supported by the Panzers, soon surrounded and overwhelmed G Company's platoon at Hill 500. 4 of the Panzer IVs that supported the assault on Hill 500 switched their fire to Marvi, adding to the already intense fire coming from the Stugs near the coppice. It was clear that Marvi was subjected to a heavy attack and that the 2nd Battalion 327th Glider Infantry Regiment was under heavy pressure. Earlier in the day, having identified the relatively weak apex position, a 57mm half-track was sent towards Hill 500. Unfortunately, the half-track was just going into position when the German armoured assault struck. The first German rounds were enough for the driver to turn his half-track around and speed back towards the cover of the stone houses at Marvi. However, the glider infantrymen, under pressure from a mounting German attack and partly blinded by the poor weather, misidentified the vehicle speeding towards them. They opened fire, destroying the half-track and killing its crew. The German panzers following up their attack towards Marvi were suddenly confronted with an obstacle on the main road, forcing them to temporarily withdraw. The unfortunate blue-on-blue incident did impede the German attack from the southern road into the village. Nevertheless, the Germans, having surrounded the Hill 500 position, soon attacked the south of Marvi with the full brunt of the assault. Flares illuminated the sky as the Panzer Grenadiers shouted and yelled as they attacked the foxholes of the glider infantrymen. At Team O'Hara, meanwhile, a Stug 300 advanced down the highway to Bastogne, where it was knocked out by a Sherman tank of C Company 21st Tank Battalion. The Stug went up in flames, further lighting up the surrounding area. This prompted a heavy German artillery barrage on a nearby farmhouse, setting it alight. With their positions compromised from the surrounding fire and light, Team O'Hara was forced to withdraw 100 meters to the rear. By now, the Germans were also trying to infiltrate their positions from the north. The 54th Armoured Infantry Battalion fought off the infiltration attempts, but the battle soon spread westward too, when 12 German panzers supported by Panzer Grenadiers broke the cover from the woods and headed towards the highway where Company F had dug in. The Marvi defenders were under pressure from three sides. Kampfgruppe 901 had thrown in many of its assets in an attempt to overrun the glider infantrymen. Meanwhile, at Hill 500, First Lieutenant Stanley Morrison of G Company, who had already been temporarily captured during the fighting of the 20th, had withdrawn the remnants of the platoon to his command post. At this stage, Morrison was still in contact with Colonel Harper over the phone. "Harper, what's your situation?" "Morrison, now they are all around me. I see tanks just outside my window. We are continuing to fight them back, but it looks like they have us." 3 minutes later, Harper called Morrison again. Morrison's reply was, "We are still holding on," but the line went dead afterwards. Hill 500 had finally been overrun at 7 p.m. First Lieutenant Morrison was to win the Silver Star for his brave action at Marvi. Although surrounded by the Germans, he fought on with his men until they were all killed or captured, giving the defenders at Marvi time to reform. The absence of armour support on Hill 500 had been a considerable weakness, and O'Hara eventually sent 2 Sherman tanks to Marvi upon Colonel Harper's insistence and tactics to say that the order had come directly from McAuliffe. By 8 p.m, elements of Panzer Lehr Regiment 901 had entered the southern part of Marvi. They were working through the houses but were quickly locked in a deadly fight for the possession of each house. Colonel Harper had thrown in what reserves he had, but his regimental line was quite stretched. The capture of Hill 500 put the Germans in a good position to exploit their gains and envelop the village from the west and push through to Bastogne in between the southern highway and Marvi. Yet the destroyed half-track along the main road still prevented panzers from entering the village. Operationally more pressing, the localized engagements along one front at the time, while putting the American defenders at critical stages, still allowed the Screaming Eagles to divert reinforcements from other parts of the encircled town. By evening on the 23rd of December, the fighting on the eastern rim of the Bastogne defences had significantly cooled down, allowing the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment to send up a platoon of Captain Stanfield Stach's A Company towards Company F of the 327th Gliders. F Company had suffered badly as their positions between Hill 500 and the highway south of Bastogne had also been overrun by German panzers and infantry. Those that managed to escape retreated back to the company's main position held by Lieutenant Smith along the highway on the crest of the hill. Smith's platoon had managed to ward off the German panzer assault using bazookas. The lay of the land prevented the Americans to send up tank destroyers, as the open ground was immediately fired upon by German armour down the valley. While 3 tanks of Team O'Hara, known as Force Charlie 16, were present near the crest, they were mainly good for moral support as the darkness prevented the Shermans to be used effectively and efficiently. The gap that had developed in between Marvi and the southern highway was quickly closed by a platoon of F Company 327th Gliders before the Germans could build on their successes. The 2nd Battalion 327th Gliders was also given batteries D and E of the 81st Anti-Aircraft Battalion, as well as Major Husted's part of Team Cherry. The 12 guns in Husted's force were put in an arc along the high ground northwest of Marvi to stop and ward off any German armoured attack in the sector. The moves were completed around midnight, and Lieutenant Colonel Rousey, the 2nd Battalion executive officer, took personal charge of the threatened area. Yet both German attacks that developed in front of Rousey's force both struck Lieutenant Smith and Technical Sergeant Butler's platoons rather than the gun position. A pair of Panzers got to within throwing distance of Smith's platoon before they were forced to retreat by bazooka fire. By then, however, Smith's command post was burning. Nevertheless, Smith and his orderlies remained in the basement as the upper structure burned. Inside Marvi, meanwhile, both supporting Sherman tanks had also arrived at midnight. The well-dug-in Glider infantrymen were able to keep the Panzer Grenadiers at bay while the destroyed half-track was still blocking the road. In trying to turn back to find another route, a German panzer was destroyed by the newly arrived Sherman tanks, further checking any other German panzer assault inside the village. One further Panzer IV was knocked out opposite Team O'Hara. After nightfall, most of the fighting died down, apart from the occasional skirmish inside the village. Nevertheless, the line was still heavily shelled by mortar fire. Soon after dawn on 24 December, the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment retook the initiative. Colonel Harper visited the line and patrols were pushed out from Marvi towards Hill 500 to ascertain the fate of First Lieutenant Morrison and towards the former positions of F Company. Hill 500 was, however, still in German hands. Team O'Hara also pushed out patrols. These reached their old roadblock without much opposition. The First Light also allowed the 2nd Battalion to assess its positions. Elements of the Panzergrenadier Lehr Regiment 901 were still in possession of a handful of houses in the south of Marvi, and the battalion had so far suffered 5 men killed and 7 wounded inside the village. To the west, the Germans asked permission from Lieutenant Smith to clear their dead. It wasn't until the first Germans came to collect their dead that the mortaring ceased and the fighting died down on this front. The 327th Glider Infantry Regiment had successfully withstood Kampfgruppe 901's main assault on the village. During the afternoon, P-47s bombed and strafed Marvi. The tide had turned and the Glider infantrymen, aided by the Sherman tanks, pushed south. A German tank which had been hidden in a haystack was chased from the village as patrols skirmished with the German infantry. A further P-47 mission bombed Marvi in the late afternoon. That same evening, the Luftwaffe bombed Bastogne. The front at Marvi had held, although just. The unfortunate half-track destroyed in a blue-on-blue incident proved invaluable in blocking the German panzers, while reinforcements arrived just in time to restore a worsening situation. Nevertheless, the 2nd Battalion 327th Glider Infantry Regiment had once again borne the brunt of the Panzer Lehr Division's attempts to capture Bastogne. The line held, and the Screaming Eagles stood firm as Christmas Day was just around the corner. The battles of Marvi are an excellent example of the tenacious defense of the 101st Airborne Division and combat commands. Despite the Germans' best efforts and the extreme weather, the Screaming Eagles stuck to their foxholes and warded off the Panzers and Panzer Grenadiers. This was Days Destroyer. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, why not consider subscribing and liking the video? I hope to catch you in the next one. Cheers.